Welcome to a new photo editing challenge. My name is Phil Ebener, and I'm with Video School Online and the Photography and Friends Facebook group. Every month, we do an editing challenge where we give you a raw photo to practice working with. This one is from wesaturate.com, a place where you can get great photos to practice with. Just like in the previous months, this is the first time I'm actually going to look at this photo and edit it myself. So these editing videos are a little bit longer, a little bit rougher, because I'm just like you, looking at it for the first time and kind of experimenting with it. So we've got this great photo from Hugo Ribeiro, and just gonna see what this landscape photo turns out like. The first thing I like to do generally is crop my photos. And with this one, since it is a landscape, for me, I tend to go a little bit wider, and personally, one of my favorite crops is a 16:9, which is just the standard aspect ratio of our TVs and a lot of our devices now, and it's just something that I find kind of natural to look at, and it does give us a little bit more, it's a little wider. And because there's a lot of negative space up in the sky and also down in these rocks, I don't really need to see that much rock down below. So I'm going to move up just like this. I'm kind of putting this horizon of the lake on this third line, the horizon of the mountains in the background, kind of on this top third line. And I think something like that looks pretty good. If you want to participate in these challenges, you can join the Photography and Friends Facebook group if you are a member of any of our photography courses. Go over to videoschoolonline.com, check out our photography courses, and once you enroll, you can participate and join the group. And those courses are a really great deal, and there's courses for all types of photographers. So the next thing I do is play around with the tone for all of this. I can tell that in the background, the mountains are a little bright. The rocks in the foreground are a little bright as well. So I'll do some initial adjustments, bringing down our whites, bringing down our highlights, just to see what that does. With landscapes, I really like to punch up the contrast, so I'm going to bring down the blacks. And you can see, oh, that's a little bit too far, so I'm only going to bring them down just a little bit. Shadows, depending on what the landscape looks like, I'll either bring them down to get more of that contrast or bring them up to get more of that detail. See, now that I'm bringing up those shadows, because I like seeing some of the shadow detail in the shadows of the trees and things like that, and the mountainside over here, I want to bring back some of that contrast, so I'm going to bring the blacks down just a little bit just to get that contrast back. In terms of clarity, dehaze, vibrance, saturation, dehaze, I'm going to do a little dehazing, but with an adjustment brush for the mountains in the background. The sky is looking pretty good. You can tell if I actually add a bunch of dehaze to this photo, we get a lot more detail across the board, but I'm going to do that to specific parts of this image. With clarity, I like to boost clarity a little bit for landscapes just to bring back a little detail, make things a little bit sharper and punchier, and that looks pretty good for me. Vibrance and saturation. For landscape, since there's no people in it, generally I will actually boost the whole saturation up instead of vibrance. Vibrance is good if you're trying to get the photo to be more colorful, but you have people in there, because vibrance doesn't affect skin tones as much as saturation, which just boosts the colors and the saturation of all colors across the board. So boosting that a little bit's pretty good, but I'm actually going to undo that, and we're going to make some more specific adjustments down below with the HSL and color panel. I skipped over the tone curve, and I reserve that kind of for the end if I want to make some minor final adjustments with the contrast and exposure. So now down to the HSL panel, I'm going to click on saturation, and I'm going to click on this little color picker. So if I click on that, then move over to my image, I can pick a specific color to boost the saturation. Now this lake is already very colorful, but if I click here and boost it a little bit more, just to bring out more color, what happens is it picks some of the blue, and if I go all the way, it looks too saturated. But if I go just subtly, let me undo that, go back again, you can see that it's bringing up the blue and the aqua, which brings out some of the color in the sky as well, which I like. Now with the green, I might go in here with the green, try to find some green right here, boost that as well, just to make the forest pop just a little bit. Maybe go back here because the forest over in the distance is a little bit more brown. Now, it's starting to look a little bit too oversaturated, so I'm going to bring back down those greens quite a bit. Cool. Split toning, I'm going to leave. Detail, Lightroom automatically adds some detail. Now what I'm going to do, let me unclick my color picker. What I'm going to do is zoom in here, and you can kind of see the detail panel over here. If there's any sort of noise and grain that we want to reduce, there is a little bit, so I'm going to add that just a little bit. And that does reduce some of the grain. Now for landscapes, we want everything to be pretty sharp, so if by increasing the noise reduction, it kind of blurs the edges of everything a little bit, so you don't want to go too crazy with this. Sharpening, I'm just going to leave it as is. Now, one thing I notice when I zoom in here, look at this green edge. It's kind of hard to see, but you see this like sort of green highlight along the edge of this rock? That's called chromatic aberration. And that's just something that happens with certain types of lenses in certain situations. Sometimes you see more of like a magenta. I'm trying to see if there's magenta kind of here on this rock, these edges. So I'm going to go back to this edge, and I want you to pay attention to this line. I'm going to check on remove chromatic aberration. See what happens. It's very subtle, but see how that edge line, it kind of goes away. That's that chromatic aberration. And when you're zoomed out, you don't notice it. But if you're blowing up this picture, printing it out, or viewing it and zoomed in like that, then doing that is pretty good. One thing I'm thinking about after looking at this image, because I'm pretty much done with all of the basic tools, I'm going to go in and make some adjustments using the brush or maybe the gradient filters, is the crop. It's very balanced over to the right-hand side with this rock. It almost feels unbalanced. So I'm going to see what happens if I actually zoom in and crop more into the lake itself, something like this with the lake more centered. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you like it like that or like that? I think this rock is a little bit too much for me, so I'm going to crop in like that. I'm not going to perfectly center the lake because it doesn't necessarily need to. Oh, man, but then we got these two trees right here that kind of like creates this nice sort of framing of the lake. Oh, this is a tough one, but I think I'm going to go right about here. Just crop in just a little bit. And to be honest, I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to end up with this photo, but I think I like something like that a little bit better. It feels a little bit more balanced to me. All right, so now I want to do some specific adjustments to the mountains in the background to try to bring out that detail. So what I'm going to do is choose my adjustment brush. Check this little box down here to show selected mask overlay so I can see where I'm working. And then if I drag up the size of the brush down here and start brushing, we can kind of see where it brushes. I'm also going to turn on auto mask, and that's going to try to help me select just the mountains without going over the edges. So see what happens if I brush on here, and even if I go over the edge a little bit, it kind of keeps just the brush on the mountains, which is pretty good. Because I don't really, with this adjustment brush, I don't want to affect the sky behind it. Now, sometimes though, with the auto mask on, it doesn't select parts that you actually want to select, so you might have to go over it a couple times. It's just kind of trying to pick based off different exposures and looking at the edges of things, and so you might have to go over a couple times. You can always add more brush on more adjustment later too. Now I'm going to turn off my mask overlay so I can see what I'm doing, and I'm just going to first start with dehaze. Increase that dehaze, see what happens. Pretty cool. What if we wanted to give the mountains in the background more of like a warm tone? We can increase the temperature like this. That looks kind of interesting, as if like it was more brown or more more like sunrise or something. That's kind of cool. Or we could go down to color here and we could add color by pre-selecting some color or just dragging around our color down here. Now you can get super crazy with it. Generally, you don't want to go too crazy with this, and I'm actually just going to not add any color there. Sometimes it's good to like literally look away from the screen and look back to see what you're working with, to see, oh, does this look a little unnatural? And to me now it does look a little unnatural. So I'm going to bring back down that warmth just a little bit. I just didn't want it to be too cool. You could also see a before and after using the backslash button on your keyboard. Before, after, before, after. Another thing I might do is just bring down the shadows just a little bit. I like having a little bit more contrast because before, and kind of what I was trying to do with the dehaze was make it look like it's not, well, hazy. It looked a little washed out. So depending on how much information is in this raw image, we can do some really cool stuff with it. So I'm kind of bringing down the exposure overall of a lot of the different tones. Something like that looks pretty good. Cool. So we can, again, see the before and after. Or we can just delete this and undo that to see what we did to the mountains. Cool, right? Now, if I'm going a little too fast, I know I'm kind of breezing through this edit. And I really create these videos for people who know how to edit in Lightroom. If you don't know how to edit in Lightroom, we have courses on complete beginner to end so that you can learn this program. We also have the photography masterclass, which covers a lot of different editing applications, including Lightroom. That's probably the best course to enroll in, and I'll add a link down below if you're interested in that class. But again, also with we have specific Lightroom Classic CC courses or courses on other editing apps like Photoshop, Lightroom CC, the new cloud-based version, Affinity Photo, and more. All right, so do I want to do any more adjustments? I don't know. What do you think? I think I'm going to see what I can do with these rocks. They're still a little distracting to me because they're kind of bright. So I'm going to take a graduated filter, this button here, click and drag this way. Now, if I turn my mask overlay on, you can see that it's selecting what's below this line, and I can move this around, I can rotate it, I can extend the feathering by clicking the outside lines. So I'm just kind of trying to get all those rocks. I could go in here, I could try to do some sort of color mask or range mask or luminance range mask. And what this allows me to do is select just a certain exposure of this selection. So if I take this range and I increase it, I'm really just trying to select those highlights on the rocks. Something like that looks pretty good. Let's turn this off. Now let's just bring down the exposure overall. Yeah, that's pretty good. Let's bring down the shadows, bring down the blacks, get some of that contrast back. I think that looks, oh yeah, see, now everything to me anyways is a little bit more balanced. Now, on the opposite side, though, we have this mountain over here. So I'm going to actually take an adjustment brush. Again, with auto mask on, we're going to brush and just select this mountain over here and maybe try to bring up some of the exposure of it because it's a little bit dark, and that big dark wall over there is a little bit overpowering for this image. So again, you can see that it's selecting everything kind of behind the green tree, which is what we want. Let's turn that off. Now let's just bring up the overall exposure. See how for this image, sometimes I don't mind having shadows, overexposed parts, but for this one, I want more of an even palette across in terms of exposure. I don't even know if that makes sense, an even palette. Bring up those shadows. Let's add a little bit of warmth to this one too. Ooh, yeah, that looks a little bit more natural to me. So if I just delete this point and then undo it. You can see what it did. Now it is selecting a little bit of the tree and maybe not as much of the mountain over here as I want. So it might be good to like go in here and paint over, or again, add a range mask and maybe select just a portion of it. But I'm not going to spend much more time on the tutorial doing this, but just know that's something that you could do to try to get it a little bit more balanced. So I'm done with those adjustments. I'm pretty happy. I might just see what happens if I do some adjustments to the sky, because skies can really make or break your different landscape photos. So I'm going to take my graduated filter again. I'm going to click and drag down this time. And this time I'm going to do a range mask, but for color. Now I'm going to take my eyedropper. I'm going to pick the blue sky. And now see what it did? It selected mostly the sky. I can use this slider to select more or less of the sky so it's a little bit more blended in. I don't mind if it selects a little bit of the snow on the mountain, because that snow is reflecting the color in the sky. And so I don't mind that, because I'm going to make some adjustments there. So let's go ahead and first let's just see again what dehaze does, just adding a little bit more to make those colors pop, make the clouds pop a little bit. Then let's just go crazy with the temperature. Let's just see what warming it up does. Not my favorite. When I warm up a blue sky, what happens? It just becomes a little less saturated. What if we made it even more blue? Made it a little cooler, something like that. That looks pretty good. And again, we can kind of see the before and after. Delete that, undo. Just add a little bit more pop to that sky. Now, I think that is what I'm going to do. So here we see the before and after. Before, after. So you can see a lot of the things that I did. We've played around with the tones and the exposure. The last thing I do is just go to my basic tone curve and just see if I want to add a little bit more contrast. You also have these presets for medium contrast and strong contrast. Let's just start with the medium contrast. It's starting to look a little bit too contrasty, so I'm just going to keep it linear, bring it down just a little bit myself, boost just a little bit. When you add contrast, you also add saturation. So if you're adding too much saturation with the contrast, you might go back and bring down your overall saturation up here, or your overall vibrance up there, depending on what you're looking for. Or we can just say, hey, we want this to be black and white. Okay, I think something like that is pretty darn good. So I'm going to leave it at that. We can also see the before and after down here. So we got that before and after shot. Pretty darn cool, huh? I hope you enjoyed this lesson and this Lightroom edit. Again, if you want to take part in these photo editing challenges each month, you can join the Photography and Friends Facebook group. We only approve members who are in any of our classes. Our classes are super cheap. You could get them for under $15 on Udemy. You could also become a member over at videoschoolonline.com and get access to all of our courses for one monthly fee, or become a lifetime member and get access to all of our existing and future courses for that one price. And that just helps us pay for the time and energy spent on running the group, and also putting together these tutorials for you and putting them out for free on places like Facebook and YouTube. Awesome. Thank you so much again for watching, and we'll see you in the group. And I can't wait to see your photos as well. Cheers.